Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second event of the series Reimagining Freedom of Expression in Post-Digital Societies. My name is Giulia Pelillo. I'm the head of the research area Cultural Studies here at the Vienna School of International Studies. And this evening, I'm also the co-organizer of this series together with Clara Kostal of the Austrian Commission for UNESCO and Anke Schad-Spindler at EDUCULT. Before handing over to Anke, I want to say a few words about the series and why we decided to start this series on freedom of expression. And the reason is that freedom of expression has become a site of struggle. On the one hand, it is the pillar of the UNESCO Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, so it is recognized institutionally as something very important to promote cultural diversity. On the other, especially recently, it is often invoked to abuse the right to speech at any cost, and no matter whether this speech is racist, discriminatory, or untruth. So this year, some of you might remember what happened in Munich in February. Freedom of expression, freedom of speech has been abused also in diplomacy, when the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, accused political leaders in Europe of constraining the freedom of speech of their citizens. And why did he do that? Because the European Union requires, among others, big tech companies to be accountable for the contents they spread on their platforms. So conflicts around freedom of expression are not new. For centuries, in different epochs, politicians, media makers, intellectuals, citizens have discussed and had big conflicts about what it means to be free of speech, to be free of speaking, and what should be the limits, the constraints of this freedom. So this is not new, but what is new is the digital or post-digital environment. And so the goal of this series was, to some extent, to try to counteract the polarization that we experience in political discourse and also in everyday conversations, and to unpack freedom of expression, to see what is really at stake when people invoke freedom of speech from different positions. So we decided to devote more events and more time, because one event would be too little time for it. So to try to unpack and to point precisely to this diversity of positions, of ideals behind liberty and freedom. So the first event was here at the Diplomatic Academy in April, on 8 April, on memory and identity. Today, we are going to speak and discuss about youth cultures, and then there will be a third event at the Postsparkasse in October, on 8 October, which will focus on AI and creativity. Now I hand over to Anke Schad-Spindler, and I look very much forward to the panel and then to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giulia, Pelillo, and thank you very much also for hosting us as the Diplomatic Academy this evening. My name is Anke Schad-Spindler. I am the moderator of this evening, and I am the co-executive director of EDUCULT, one of the co-organizers of the event series. As EDUCULT, we are a research institute based in Museumsquartier in Vienna, and we deal a lot with questions of cultural policy, cultural education, participation, specifically of young people, but also of adult people who deal with young people. So we try to also look into perspectives and interactions of different generations. So this evening we talk about youth culture, and I think we all can agree that there is no youth culture as singular, but we talk about different, diverse youth cultures, scenes, worldviews, communities. And youth, I think, is this age where you are still open to experiment, to try out different identities, different peer groups, different styles. But obviously, it's also a privilege and freedom that not everyone has to experiment and try out. Is it because of education? Is it because of the need to contribute to your family's income? Is it because of the lack of a safe place to live? Or is it because of health problems, mental or physical? So there are many myths also about youth cultures and youth, and some of them we try to look into this evening to explore with our guests, with Anahita Neghabat, who is an artist, activist, and researcher, who will have the first contribution this evening, with Aron Weigl, my fellow co-director of EDUCULT, who is a cultural policy researcher and analyst, and with Cäcilia Regner, who's the youth representative of Austria's Commission to UNESCO, who will be a commenter of the contributions. So I look very much forward already. Please, Anahita, you may start.
Thank you very much. I asked for a handheld mic because I need to keep my hands busy, and I also have my notes on my phone. So good evening, everyone. My name is Anahita Neghabat. As was just mentioned, I'm a social anthropologist, artist, and activist. I sometimes work as a curator. I sometimes work as an artist, and I also work in education and critical education. I work in different projects in different ways, but it's always about similar topics. So I'm very interested in social questions of social justice. I'm interested in decolonial and post-colonial perspectives. I'm interested in racism and anti-racism and in intersectional feminism, and also in questions of political education, critical political education, and memes. And today, because the topic is post-digital societies, I will mainly be speaking, thank you, I will mainly be speaking about my meme practice. When I say meme practice, I mean that I make memes, or I used to make more memes than I make now, but I make memes. I also write about memes, I do research on memes, and I hold meme workshops where I create memes with other people, often youth, often teenagers. So I began making political memes in 2019, 6 years ago. At the time, many of you will know, maybe not everyone, I think it's an international group, I'm not sure. We had a big political scandal at the time in Austria, the Ibiza scandal. Just a very brief summary, we had a far-right government at the time, and basically due to its own corruption and incompetence, which was being filmed and then leaked, the government imploded. And at the time, this led to a huge political scandal, and a lot happened in the aftermath of this initial political scandal. But at the time, a lot of political memes were being shared in Austria. And for me, I was, at the time, I'm now 29, it was 6 years ago, so I was 23, so also a young person. And at the time where we still had this far-right government, I was always a political person and I was politically interested, but it became heavier and heavier for me to daily engage with politics, so I caught myself sometimes turning off news, for example, when I was listening to it, because I felt kind of hopeless and helpless, and also not very, like there was much that I could do at the time at least. Also what contributed to this feeling was that I lived in Budapest at the time, and I was studying at Central European University, which some of you might know as the university that is now in Vienna, because it was forced out of the country by Viktor Orban and his government through acts of legal warfare. So while I was studying there, it already became apparent that the university would most likely have to move. And I was also studying gender studies at the time, which was already no longer accepted as an academic discipline in Hungary. So it was a very repressive political context. And before we had this political scandal, a lot of people in Austria and also media was pointing at Hungary and saying, okay, this is the direction we could move in the next years if nothing happens. So it felt all the more heavy. And then this political scandal happened, there was a lot of relief, and this amazing German word Schadenfreude, which is the pleasure of someone else's downfall, basically. And I spontaneously started making political memes, also at first just ridiculing what had happened, ridiculing the decision makers, the politicians in power. And because this is how the internet sometimes worked, the page really blew up. And I realized rather quickly that now I have a really big platform that I could actually use as a social anthropologist, as a researcher, but also as someone who has also a migration background, who is a woman, etc., to speak out on political issues. And I then started asking myself, okay, how can we use memes, which are these funny images you see online, how can they be used as a form of satirical commentary? Almost like a caricature, like political caricatures are often used. And then I developed this political meme practice where I shared memes almost every day and tried to really think critically about what it means to have this platform, how I engage with this platform, and tried to do also some things differently than you might be used to from seeing them online. For example, for the arguments I made, I used sources and I said which media articles I drove this information from, for example. I also tried to distinguish between my own argument and my own position and the facts that I'm basing this on, for example. I also tried to have really easy language or to explain more difficult terms. I would also reply to comments and tell people where to get more information from what is considered credible sources, etc., etc. But I'm not here to just speak about myself. I just wanted to give you an introduction in how I started making memes. And what I learned about making memes while I was making memes and then also researching memes and writing about memes was that memes are a very powerful tool, especially for marginalized people, to intervene in political discourse. This especially applies to youth, and in the case of the groups that I often work with, also racialized youth, for example. So we can see that mainstream media often reproduces racist narratives that try to explain social problems that could be explained through a lack of justice, a lack of Verteilungsgerechtigkeit, so meaning who has wealth in this society. And populist politicians will often explain all of this through culturalist or racist explanations. And what often happens is that mainstream media will sometimes, in an effort also to report neutrally, just reproduce these narratives a lot. So of course you see also critical replies to this, but often it's just it's reproduced a lot because it's also put out there a lot. We can also see this at this time, for example, in the US, where Donald Trump, not just now, but even during his first presidency, put out so much blatant misinformation that media just couldn't keep up with debunking it, basically. And in this political climate, memes can be a powerful tool for people who otherwise don't have access or who are structurally discriminated against in institutions to make themselves and their perspectives heard. And this, of course, what this also means is that usually a meme is not made by one person. You can make a meme and you can post it, but for a meme to become successful and to start circulating and to be picked up and shared, a lot of people actually have to contribute by liking, sharing, and distributing the meme. And therefore it also becomes sort of a democratic medium in many ways, which is used by many marginalized people to make visible their situated knowledges and their experiences of discrimination. Of course, I can almost hear you think that this also has very problematic aspects, and that's very true. It's not only used by marginalized people, but it's also used by people who have very marginal perspectives. For example, the far right, the new right use memes a lot. And with memes, I also mean reels, videos, etc. So all these snippets that you see online. Use memes a lot to mobilize for their cause and also to spread misinformation. But it's not just the far right, as in not people who are like ordinary citizens, basically. It's also governments that are using memes more and more to further their cause. So there are a lot of studies and a lot of research has been done about the role of conspiracy theories and memes in the US election campaign. Also, it's well documented that, for example, the Russian government has what has often been referred to as meme factories, where people are actually being paid to make memes and spread misinformation as an act of digital warfare. And there's also very good research on how the Chinese government has been using memes especially when controversial policies are being implemented, to gain favor from its own citizens. So how this has sometimes been, came along with meme campaigns, so to speak. Nonetheless, so it's important to, memes, okay, so sometimes I'm asked, are memes problematic or not? Are they liberatory or not? And my reply would be that memes are just a medium like any other medium, and that it really depends on the infrastructure, the power dynamics, who's speaking, with what cause, which also applies to other media. It's still relevant and interesting, though, to look at memes in particular because they have certain attributes that other media doesn't necessarily have. One of which is this aspect that they are often created collectively by many people. One person might have made it, but they used something that has already been circulating. Other people like it, share it, and so forth. They are very accessible, so if you have internet and a smartphone, you can make a meme, it's free. And they are also a very powerful tool to quickly share information and perspectives because they often work with satire, which is a very effective way to also criticize very poignantly aspects that you see in society or politics or even in your own personal life. And in doing so, memes can also contribute. There's a very wonderful study by Ashley Louise Blevitt-Golsh is her name. And she did a huge study on youth and trans memes, so transgender memes. And she speaks about how transgender youth, for example, have a very high rate of depression and are more suicidal, et cetera, due to discrimination. And in her study, she writes about how these teens who often have very isolated experiences, especially if they don't live in a big city, they might be the only queer person in their family, for example, make memes about their very subjective experience of being marginalized or feeling unwell, and then find very big resonance online, which creates a sense of also shared identity and belonging to a larger group. So it can also be really empowering for people who otherwise feel very lonely, and I don't mean this on an individual level, I mean on a structural level due to structural discrimination. I wanted to share a project of mine with you. Let me check my notes. So in general, if you speak of freedom of expression and youth, it's very important to stress two things. Youth are not a homogeneous group. They have very different lived realities. They are affected by discrimination and violence differently, also global differences, etc. And who gets to speak and how always depends on power and dependency structures. But youth in general are quite dependent from adults. So it's not only about what can technically be said, it's also about how can it be said if you are highly depending on the people around you. Do you feel comfortable or free to say what you want to say if you are, for example, in a school setting where your future basically depends on whether or not what you're saying is being seen as acceptable in a way. Yes. Memes are also often used to marginalize youth even further by other teenagers. So there are a lot of memes that mock, for example, disabled teens, teens of color, queer teens, etc. So it's not black or white. It's like I said, it's medium like any other medium, basically. Okay, but I wanted to tell you about a project of mine. So since I think 6 years or something, I've been holding meme workshops under the title "Meme the Pain Away," where I meet with different people, adults and teenagers. But my favorite group are racialized teenagers. And they are invited to turn their experiences, their lived experiences of joy, of pleasure, of friendship, but also of discrimination, of structural violence, of racism they experience at school, into memes and to share the experience with each other. And it is a really powerful space where these teenagers come together and share experiences that have been very painful. So, for example, for migrant youth or racialized youth, I don't have to invite them to speak about racism. They immediately speak about racism they experience in school, immediately, because it's just such a big part of their life. And they then start making a meme about it, and then they share it in the big group, and everyone else kind of gets it because they experience the same thing, and they're laughing, and it turns a very painful experience into an experience of joy and also empowerment. It's a really empowering experience, and it has also the aspect that you can then later share it online anonymously, so you don't necessarily have to out yourself to be able to criticize what you're experiencing in your day-to-day life. And one of the most favorite projects, so now I'm getting more and more specific because I'm talking about my practice, that I wanted to share with you today was a workshop that I was able to hold in 2022 in Tirana, Albania. I was invited at the time by an European Romani rights NGO, Pirena Mensa. They are based in Brussels, but they operate all over Europe. And I actually met the colleague who invited me at CEU Budapest at the time. She's now in Brussels. And then she invited me. She was like, hey, I heard you do these meme workshops. We have this youth exchange every single year where we meet in a different European city. And it's always the European city of youth of that year. And in 2022, it was Tirana. And they invite mainly Roma youth, but also it's open to everyone. So a lot of the teens who come out, so not Roma, to come together and learn about human rights in Europe, about Romani rights in Europe. And at the beginning of this, so it was a full week, at the beginning of this week, the teenagers get to choose different artistic workshops that they will then work on the whole week. And I offered this political meme workshop, and 12 or 13 teenagers joined my workshop. They were from 8 different European countries, most of them Roma, but not all of them. And we discussed a lot the situation of anti-Romanism in their respective countries, this human rights situation, how they experience discrimination, what they think about politics. So we worked intensively for a whole week. And they then started making memes about their specific experiences from their respective national contexts, sharing with the others the parallels and what they have in common, what they're experiencing, but also the differences through these memes. But then we also, for example, visited the Tirana City Hall, and they asked really critical questions about the situation of Roma in Albania. And for example, the representative, the politician there said, yeah, we have this great program where Roma are being employed. And then one of the teenagers asked, yeah, but are they also in decision-making positions? And then this person said, that's a difficult question. And then she pushed and she was like, no, answer the question, please. And then this politician said, no, it's the cleaning of the street. So this is the program that they have for the Roma population. And at the end of the week, I'm just going to quickly stand up. So let me show you. So this is one of the memes that they made. I'm sharing this with their permission. So you can see on the left, Roma person applying for the job with 10 years plus experience, and then right, non-Roma person who doesn't know what the interview is about. Recruiters trying to pick the right person, and they are only grabbing the right pill. And this, for example, was an experience that they shared, that they knew from, that they said, okay, this is not specific to my national context, this we know, all of us know. This is another one. This was about a specific program with EU funding. We gave so the politicians or the government is saying we gave apartments to Roma people and they live in excellent conditions. And then you can see here the excellent conditions. Okay. Then this one, it was also when the Black Lives Matter protests were really big. So Europeans, black people in America are mistreated and ignored, and then Europeans when they see a Roma person. And then finally, I told you about the city hall. They made this meme, one of them made this meme, Anna was her name. And it says, Tirana municipality employing Roma people in decision-making positions, but it's deciding which broom to use today. It's really brilliant, I loved this meme. And then finally what we did was, at the end of the week we had a festival in public space in Tirana, where every single group presented what they had worked on. So we had dancing, singing, graffiti, different things. And we made an exhibition of these memes that we had created together, and we also printed them on stickers, and we handed out these stickers. And people were really interested because people love memes. So people were actually actively approaching us to receive these stickers. And it really sparked a conversation not only of what these teens were experiencing in their respective national contexts, but also on a broader level, which is also a European experience. But then also specifically, we left this in Tirana, and we put these stickers in public space also on lampposts and stuff like that. Yes, and then they also created a meme page, which was sadly, and this is a thing that we can maybe later discuss, immediately taken down by Instagram. But it was a really great project. It was 8 teens who decided to continue sharing their experiences of anti-Romanism and human rights violations, basically, in different national contexts together online, creating a digital space that is transnational. Yeah, so I think everything else we're going to discuss in the discussion, but this is just some examples I wanted to bring. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anahita. So I forgot to mention when I introduced you that you have been honored Young European of the Year in 2022 for your work by the Schwarzkopf Foundation. So you created visibility and also recognition through your work. I would be also curious about what your followers said, like young people, but maybe we can leave this for later. Just maybe to give you some numbers also, the share of 14 to 24-year-olds of the total population in Austria, what do you guess approximately? How much is this? Guess in your own head. It's 11% in Austria, and worldwide, guess it's 30%. So overall, we talk about a minority in Austria, but worldwide, the world is young. So just to give you some numbers. And maybe Aron has prepared some more numbers for us in his presentation. Let's see. Aron, as I said, as a cultural policy researcher, you also involve young people in participatory work, participatory research, but also you look at participatory programs from the perspective of an evaluator and consultant. So yes, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So good evening also from my side. Is the microphone working? Yes, okay. So I will stand here because I have to click always, and I would have preferred to sit also, but okay, that's fine. This thing is not working. Nice to see you here live and in the room and in the stream. So I was, thank you for your words, Anahita. Interestingly, when I was researching for the input, I also find this meme, the last one you showed, just with other words. So the same pictures of the guy there with a totally different meaning. So that's what you also said. It can be used in different ways and from different political sides and so on. So that's also something I will tackle. But Anke, as you said, as EDUCULT, we are researching, a research institute, also connecting very much practice of participation, cultural participation, with theoretical work researching on these topics. So I thought I also have to play this part now and bring some theoretical inputs on this. And probably you knew about these numbers in general, but I think it's always good to have them really as evidence in front of us as a basis to discuss. So I will shortly tell about trends and obstacles in political engagement by young people, and then also the connection. That's less data, but more philosophical thoughts about the connection to the digital analog nexus we are living in somehow. And then let's see what the time allows. I can also bring in some examples of our work later in the discussion, perhaps. Let's see what the time brings, and also some reflections on this. So the central thesis is basically that young people have a certain power in speaking out for human rights, climate justice, peace, etc., but still they remain underrepresented in decision making. That's kind of a thesis. The question for us is also immediately then, okay, what can we do about it? So let's come to this mapping. And before we start, I would ask you to make this little survey with us. These questions were also asked in the Demokratie Monitor, so the monitoring of democracy in Austria last year. And I would like to see, before I presented the numbers like they are in the study, what we think in this room here. So I have to. I'm not sure if it's already showing in on your mobiles. If you either scan this QR code or you go on menti.com and put in this code, then you can respond. And as I see only young people here in this room, we are quite a good comparison then to the survey. Anyhow, it's always shifting. Now we are nearly until 40 youth or something. So. Can you give me a short feedback if you see the first question?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So then I will change to the presentation that everybody can see the results. Everybody is logged in who wants to participate. Great. So. By the way, also people in the stream can participate. Still possible here via the code. So we see here, do you never, rarely, once a week, several times a week, or daily talk about political issues with your family, friends, or colleagues? That was one question in this study. We see that half say, at least here in our community group, daily, and 44% say several times a week. Then we have 6% saying rarely. That's it. Okay, let's keep that somehow in mind. And let's go to the next question. Do you agree with the following statement? People like me can make a difference by getting involved in politics. So this question about empowerment. Yeah? Do I feel that I can change something by my own engagement? And here. So it's interesting that we have. No. Okay, that's it probably. So yeah, we see that only 3 say strongly, more say fairly strongly, and somewhat. Okay, let's also keep that in mind and go to the last one. So do you think when political decisions are made, my interests are also taken into account? So that's a question about somehow representation also, but also the representation of interests. Yeah. Different picture here than before. So even in this group, we are not so much convinced that our interests are taken into account politically. Thank you for that. We will see now what the actual outcome of the survey was. And we are talking here about people in the age of Demokratie Monitor Austria, so there's an age from 16 to 26. This is the first question about the political disengagement, so how much are you involved in political discussions with your friends and so on. In 2018, 20% said, no, I'm not at all involved. This changed significantly to the study from that was published last year to only 5%. So obviously there is an increase in political engagement in daily life discussions. It might correspond to what we feel about society that is politicized. Here, 47% believe political participation can affect change, but more than half does not. And to the other question we had, if I feel considered, you know, so in political decision making. To 18, the majority still felt interests were considered. Now we have a significant drop in this perception. Only 23% is saying that now. So it's somehow, on the one hand, more political engagement, at least on a daily basis, everyday life basis. On the other hand, we feel this this significant drop in perceived consideration of their own interests in political decisions. This was an Austrian study. I also have some numbers on a European level. Here it's more about who participates in elections, European elections for the Parliament. This is a study of the Committee for Constitutional Affairs of the European Parliament, so-called AFCO committee, and we have a obvious drop. Also, it was never high, but it is getting more and more difficult to motivate young people to vote in European elections. So we have here more than 70% of the eligible young voters did not vote. So less than 30% did. Another interesting point is about the representation in national parliaments. So in national parliaments in countries in the EU and OECD countries, it's basically the same result from two different studies. This AFCO committee published in 2023. So less than 2% of the members of parliament are under 30. And even less younger women if we look at the gender. So to see that in a kind of an iceberg, we have youth engagement, and especially when we come then to social media engagement, we see that it's there, but at the same time declining trust, lack of representation. That's not new, it's always somehow like that, but yeah, kind of disillusionment and that there's a feeling of being ignored. And saying all that, there's little incentive only for politicians to focus on policies that benefit young people because of their marginalization. They don't vote, so why do I have to care of them? Or they even are not allowed to vote, we will see soon, so why would I care for them? So this is really a big democratic problem. On the same, or on the other hand, to say, there is a great potential to engage more young people in democratic participation. And there are, for example, parties, they're seeing that, also far-right parties seeing that. They see that they are not voting, so I will try to motivate them to vote for me. But also in a positive way you can see it, to really try to see this potential in general. And it's not about potential, I think it's also about the absolute need more than ever, because also of this, even if you can engage more young people, you will never make it possible that they really vote because they're not allowed to vote. In Vienna, we see that here. This is the main election, the numbers of voters and the Weigl. You see that the absolute number has risen in the last 40 years. Now we have 1.72 million eligible voters, in total voters, and you see that the part of the ones that are not allowed to vote is significantly rising. To speak in numbers, it's it's 35.4% of all eligible age residents, they're not allowed to vote due to non-Austrian citizenship. And especially many young people are part of this group, young people that are born and raised in Vienna. So there are intersectional difficulties at the end. Who is really not allowed to vote? We have an absolute democratic problem here, and we have to do something. Something is already happening, though, in the digital analog nexus we're living in, and I call it double-edged sword, or also the nuclear technology of the 21st century. It can be, and we already see that, used in a very destructive way. At the same time, for sure, it can also be used in a good way for example, political engagement and networking and so on. And when I don't want to repeat what you said already, but the second point is important. We have also via memes, for example, a global youth cultures development, so where the national borders are not relevant anymore, and that is really something that changes our general concept of citizenship, like we had it for a long time, since Kant, you can say, the global citizen that is somehow it's a universalistic concept, understood as global citizenship, but this falls under the scrutiny of post and decolonial criticism of Western-centric definitions of universal values, and that's only one part of this. This is not new anyhow. As we can see when we look at Spivak, she wrote already in 1979 about planetary entanglement, so that we are planetary creatures, not speaking of global citizens anymore. And now, in today's youth culture, it seems more that there's a connection to social networks, to platforms, and their performative effects. This is a challenge because the model of individualistic citizen is being replaced by the model of more or less loosely connected collectives, distributed information and augmented decentralized modes of decision making. So there's another crisis when it comes to civic education, democracy education. What kind of citizenship are we talking about? So it's more like that now. And there are different groups seeing citizenship in different ways. It's not positive or negative or any way. It can be used and turned around. Some see this as a basis for inclusion and equal rights. Others see it as a basis for patriotism and border walls. So, I don't want to go into detail here. This is just that you can see what I said before. But on the nuclear technology, somehow it can work well for networking and so on, and that also somehow in a way for developing skills and dispositions for offline participation then again. But for sure, when it comes to algorithmic filter bubbles, we know the problems, we know, and you talked also about it somehow, that there is a misinformation, a chance and opportunities for misinformation and so on. And perhaps we will talk about this later, what that means. So that's also some result of the Demokratie Monitor, that is that there is really a lack of also civic or deficiencies in civic education. And this is what the young people report themselves. They see these deficiencies. There's a lack of training in how I can debate, how I can conduct a debate. There's a lack of media literacy education. And how do I know what is quality in media information and so on. And there's insufficient understanding of citizen rights even, where you can say, okay, at least that could have been done in school, but yeah. Yeah, so I don't know what the time says.
Maybe we can leave the other thoughts for later. Thank you very much, Aron.
Do that. Perhaps then just
summing up
thoughts. I just perhaps want to say some, because that's always what we do. Yeah, we always look at the theory, we look at the practice, and then we come up with recommendations. So let me do this here also shortly. I think that perhaps we can talk about it also. We need to shift from giving participation to claiming participation. I think that's really important if we talk about political engagement. Also what I just said, we have to strengthen political and media literacy education, ensuring inclusion of marginalized youth. But again here, connected to the first point, it's not only about giving that, but also empower them that they can claim it. And we all somehow can claim it at the end. And the fourth point, how can we use digital platforms responsibly? So that might be some not so new points, but I think they're important here, and perhaps we go into details later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aron, for also feeding us with some data and statistics. And I think it's already clear that there's a significant gap of representation of young people in parliaments, in politics, and of their importance for the future also as speakers of their own generation. And specifically what you said about the lack of representation of women in official politics, I'm really glad that we have a young woman here also. We have several, but you, Cäcilia, you are a youth representative speaking on behalf of UNESCO in Austria. Maybe you can say a little bit more about your own role and what it entails, and also maybe share your thoughts on what we've just heard from Anahita and Aron. So maybe some points that you'd like to pick up on their presentations.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very excited to be here and contribute maybe a bit of a younger voice to the panel. Also, thank you for your inputs. It was very interesting. I took many notes that I will dive into. But first of all, I want to introduce myself maybe and explain what this youth representation role I have in is exactly about. So it's a voluntary position at the Austrian UNESCO Commission, and I engage with youth. I do youth work for the Commission. We organize events. I do youth monitoring over the whole youth culture in Austria. What is important to note here is that I have a very Austrian-viewed or Austria-centered viewpoint on the whole situation, because I'm the Austrian youth representative, I'm white, I'm female, so therefore obviously also my viewpoint is a bit biased. It was already mentioned several times that youth is not a homogeneous group, it is very diverse, so that is very important to keep in mind. Yeah, but as a youth representative, I'm also on different conferences, also internationally. Just last week I was in Geneva at the UN. And in these spaces, when I'm there, it is very easy to realize that youth is underrepresented or not even representative. And that is an issue, as it was already highlighted in both of your talks. And what I feel like is important to notice, that is not because youth, or depends on which youth we're talking about, doesn't want to engage, but these places and spaces are often not made for youth. They're not very inclusive. They have not a very low threshold for youth to enter these spaces. So the UN, but also political institutions, you were talking about the parliaments and stuff, but also if we just look at these spaces here, we're at the Diplomatic Academy. It is a super nice setting, but of course, for young people, talking in a Bourdieuian sense, you could say, even if you can critically talk about Bourdieu and look at his studies critically, youth often does not have the cultural capital, for example, to take part in these events and talk about these kind of issues, because they simply don't feel comfortable, even though their position and their input would be very important to be represented here. So yeah, that is what I wanted to highlight. So just not, there's this simple viewpoint, just everybody can talk and can contribute, but there's this material freedom which is needed, which is also often highlighted by UNESCO, because that is not something that is accessible for everyone.
and also not for the whole culture of youth. Yeah, and then I wanted to add to your input, Anahita. It was super interesting that you were also talking about the Ibiza scandal, because I then had to remember back that at that time I was 15, and it was also the first time that I really got politicized also through memes on Instagram and through the internet, and it was such a fun way suddenly engaging with politics, and that was really a starting point also for myself, and it's super interesting. But also, as you highlighted when you were mentioning memes being democratic, you mentioned that one has to keep in mind the structures behind them, and I feel like that is an issue which is very, very important to highlight when we're talking about digital spaces, is of course the algorithm. And as you can see, in Gen Z, there are different movements going on. We had in the past Fridays for Future, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, many different ones that made their way from the digital spaces through networking or something onto the street. But still, it's difficult to build up these movements or these movements outside of the digital spaces if the algorithm is not working for your sake, or if you don't get the followers, the shares, whatever. So it's not that easy, I would say. Also right now, you can see online examples of how the algorithm is suppressing different movements. And I find it interesting because I feel like Gen Z and also Generation Alpha, they're finding ways around that to trick the algorithm in some way, and that is super innovative, and that is maybe something I can tell from my lived experiences, that taking the example of Palestine or Gaza, that people reporting on the situation there, they're getting suppressed by the algorithm, so they try to find their way around when they're writing the way Palestine or Gaza, for example, that they do not use the letters, but they use symbols or digits instead. So instead of an E, they write a 3, or instead of a I, they write an exclamation mark, which is super interesting. At the same time, they have different approaches. For example, the Reel or TikTok hook. I don't know if you know it, but it's basically if you have a Reel or a TikTok, you, instead of just starting with the political content and talking about it, you play another Reel before that, which is very catchy, and quickly cut it, and then suddenly you cut to your content. So you get the viewer to stay with you and not just scroll further, but engage because it's interesting, and then you start with the political contents. Yeah, I feel like these are examples which are very interesting. Also, I don't know, that is very common, but it's very sad due to our shortened attention spans. There are these ways of split attention. So basically you have Reels or TikToks videos where you have on one screen somebody talking about an issue, explaining stuff, and then on the bottom you have another screen showing a video game that is currently being played, or something that is very vividly moving. So people look at it, but at the same time their attention is split and they listen to the political content. Because sadly, but often our attention span as a young generation is not that long, so it's way more engaging if you have something else to look at to really keep you entertained. Yeah, that's something, just practice.
Thank you, Cäcilia. Thank you so much. I think your comment was really, for me, making clear that there's so much going on in young people's lives, you know, like the speed of events, the sheer velocity of, you know, switching here and there, and then also trying to reconnect and get a feeling about, you know, what matters and what is important. I think that's something that we can keep in mind. I think all the three of you talked from various angles about the digital spaces that offer both unprecedented opportunities for global connection among young people, but also among different generations. And also, as you said, they perpetuate this exclusion through algorithm. So you also gave us some strategies already how young people find ways to navigate these spaces creatively, maybe also artistically. And I would be curious about your views on that. Like, how can young people, through digital spaces, build solidarity and maybe also influence social change despite existing economic and educational inequalities? Maybe Anahita, you have some views on that.
I think what I really like about all of what you just said, Cäcilia, is how you highlighted these strategies to basically hack the algorithm or hack the system. And I think this also points to a very important issue that's going on, that in digital spaces, everything is constantly changing, not just the content, but also the platforms themselves. And this ominous algorithm that we always speak of and we're trying to kind of react to is this black box where nobody really knows what's actually going on, and it's also constantly changing. So that's why I really like that you highlighted these specific strategies, which are so also fluid and ever-changing and constantly changing. So I think my response would be youth are already doing it, but I think it's also getting harder and harder. And I'm curious to see what's going to happen now with that artificial intelligence is also getting more and more intelligent. Because right at this moment, there are strategies where you can sort of go avoid this also, in some cases, even censorship or the inability to speak about certain topics directly through these hacks. But the question is, I think that this is going to change very soon as artificial intelligence is also picking up. But it's very interesting, it's not only used by people to share progressive content, but also what is often referred to as dog whistles is what many far-right people do, where they signal to each other through the use of a certain emoji or a certain word that they mean something far-right, and it's very difficult to block this. You can block it, but to melden, to flag it to the platform, because it seems like something completely innocent. But people signal to each other what they mean by it. I think it's going to get more difficult to use the online space, and I think it is important that we still try to meet physically, but also I don't really like the distinction between digital, online and offline spaces, because the relations that people create online are very real and are also often translated into real relations. I don't know, I don't think there's a simple answer, because sometimes when we ask questions about digital space, we refer to it as something that fundamentally functions differently than other areas of society. But I think when it comes to like physical space or protesting in physical space, we would never ask such a question, you know what I mean? Like, what is the role of physical space in protesting? Because it's complex, it's difficult, it's contextual, it's ever-changing, it depends. So I think people are using it, they're trying to find strategies and ways around it, they will continue to do so, but also the platforms are getting more and more harsh, and this rhetorical figure of free speech is currently being used to undermine free speech. So we know that, for example, Mark Zuckerberg recently said, yeah, finally we're going to have free speech again, but it's just not flagging blatant misinformation anymore, for example. And there's also sort of discursive confusion of who's sort of threatening whose speech, because the left has been portrayed as the ones canceling free speech, canceling opinions, when in reality we see that these platforms are in the hands of very authoritarian governments, people, institutions who have a large interest in furthering misinformation, hate speech, conspiracy theories, and undermining, as you said, critical perspectives. And it's not just about what's right and what's wrong, it's also about enabling critical thinking. So for example, I work for an association, it's called Verein Viel mehr für alle, and they also have an Institut für Migrationspädagogik where we offer, funded by ÖAD, workshops on racism, anti-Semitism, but also conspiracy theories at schools. And one thing I really try to do when I'm in school is teens will often ask me, is this a conspiracy theory, yes or no? And I'm always like, okay, this is a conspiracy theory, but let's find out why and how you can identify it. So it's really about, like you also said, Aron, enabling critical thinking to be able to deal with this mass of information and narratives that are constantly changing and flooding us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, Aron, I think you pointed it out that we have to have a shift from giving, room to express yourself politically or culturally to claiming this space. Maybe you can discuss a bit more what are your ideas behind this, and where do you see maybe examples where this is already put into practice?
I will do that. I will just shortly comment on what you said, if I may.
Sure.
Just to develop a bit this idea, what you mentioned about freedom of speech, and where there are limits of that. We're talking about human rights, so freedom of speech is one human right. It doesn't mean that it's the human right. We have human rights, and there are other human rights involved, so we have always to see them in a combination, and that's why not everything is free in the so-called freedom of speech. And while I was here a bit criticizing Kant, here I'm with Kant, who's saying, no, the freedom ends where my freedom ends, where the, I limit the freedom of the other, whatever. Yeah. So this is the big misunderstanding of our time. Also, I have the feeling. Yeah. But to your question, that's really difficult. This claiming instead of giving, it's really difficult from our perspective. I have to feel. I mean, and also what we see, we accompany projects to really try to give marginalized young people opportunities to participate in society. Yeah? We're evaluating them or accompanying them scientifically, and there are really good examples where they are reaching this goal, where they can reach this goal, but it's still a giving. Like with a really nice idea of artistic approaches, like Diplomatische Akademie Wien is such an example here in Vienna, where they have artistic workshops as well as an arts festival, where the young people are co-defining, co-designing. It always depends on the individuals and also the workshop leaders and so on, but in general this is happening, I would say. Perhaps this is the first step, to give the opportunity to co-define, co-conceptualize at the beginning, co-implement in the process, and then also co-own the results. So we had, for example, a citizen science project. Sparkling Science is one of these programs where in Austria, where young people become researchers together with professional researchers to certain topics, and we work together with the Natural History Museum on the question of colonialism today. And it's important that, for example, okay, well, we collect data together with the young people, but then the results, not we alone decide about the interpretation, but together with the young people, that there is an ownership about the results also, for example, and the same with artistic production. So this is the first step. What you said is for me a claiming, to find ways around. That is for me truly claiming. But yeah, it's that's somehow happening. But the question is, how can we also strengthen this?
The question is also who makes the rules. Like, if we don't give the space, it might be claimed, but with ways that aren't socially accepted, violent ways of destruction. So is there a way of channeling this youth energy force into creative ways, artistic ways? Is it digital, or is it in the presence? Maybe you want to.
Yeah, I would add to that, because I very much agree that this finding your way around is a way of claiming, but at the same time, one has to acknowledge that not everybody has the potential or is in the position to claim something or find this way around, or there are marginalized groups. So when we're talking about political participation and saying that this should not only be given to young people, but it should be claimed by them, it suddenly again puts so much responsibility back on the young people. And at the same time, as said, there are different groups, marginalized groups, and when you tell these marginalized young people you need to claim your own space in maybe an environment that is not made for young people, not inclusive enough, as I was talking about before, there are these thresholds. It is not that easy for young people to engage. Same with, I think, the view on media literacy. I totally agree, we need to strengthen media literacy in Austria, but simultaneously it sometimes pushes again all the responsibility onto the young people. And I really love that you mentioned that there's this other side of regulating the social media and all these platforms, because they also carry a lot of responsibility. It's not just on the teachers that they teach the young people in formal or non-formal education about media literacy, but they cannot simply just combat it, because as you were saying, AI is gonna get quicker and better and smarter. So we need to be ready, because right now, as we can already see, our education system is not catching up with the current digital developments we're seeing. So,
yeah, that's very much true. So maybe one comment before I then am in the position to give voice to the audience.
Thank you, because I would really like to respond. I totally agree with what you just said, and I would even take it a step further, perhaps. I think it makes a huge difference. So if we speak about, for example, using art or artistic methods as a way of participating in politics, it makes a huge difference who is asking young people to do this. So for example, if Roma NGO, who barely gets enough funding to do their work, is inviting me as an activist and saying, hey, maybe we can use artistic methods as a form of political participation, it is something completely different, in my opinion, than big institutions or even governments funding projects. For example, I love Diplomatische Akademie. I love the project, and I love what they're doing. I will be attending the festival that they're having very soon, so check it out. But I think it's important to question if something like this is largely government funded, and it's called Demokratie, and it's about teaching youth democracy, and it's also largely funded from the prevention of extremism money, while at the same time citizenship laws are getting more restrictive and not less restrictive, and it's becoming more and more difficult for young people to actually become eligible voters. I think that's a problem, and it also kind of hides a way that teaching youth, a lot of these youth and marginalized youth have very good reasons to not trust institutions and trust the government, because they experience discrimination and marginalization and violence and police violence every single day. And I think we should question if funding for inclusion, and this is then artistic inclusion, comes from the same governments that restrict their rights every single day. There needs to be something happening also with the very real physical relations, access to laws, and also how wealth is distributed in society, who can access institutions, etc. at the same time.
Mm. Yeah.
Interestingly, there is not one government. So in fact, it's like one side is giving the opportunity, while the other side is restricting. Yeah. So that's interesting. As you said, I see it also. Yeah? But these projects also find ways around, I have to say. So this project, for example, yes, that might be the money from, but it's a social ministry, so I think they have the right approach, also from the funding side, I would say. But you're right, and perhaps I would say also to what you both said about giving or claiming. You're right. I mean, perhaps we have to empower people that they can claim. Let's perhaps say it like that, and there must be a general basis that it's even possible for sure. The rights have to be ensured.
So eventually, let's turn to our audience and the questions that you brought along. Do we have a mic? Yes.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. My name is Paolo Marci, and I'm a second-year student at the Diplomatic Academy. So my question is related to the issue of self-censorship, because we know it's clear for all of us that young people rely a lot on digital platforms. And digital platforms, they can play a role in terms of sharing opinions and expressing, let's say, the participating in public debate or debate of general interest. But at the same time, we see that there is selection, let's say, in terms of the government, which speech or which opinions can be admitted on these platforms. And young people sometimes are targeted, especially on the sensitive topics, even in democratic societies, especially on issues of Israel and Palestine. So this leads to the situation that young people being afraid of the persecution by the governments, they're afraid of expressing their opinion, and thus leads to the situation of self-censorship. And self-censorship is not just alone. We also see the chilling effect on other human rights, in particular the political rights, the right to privacy, also the right, let's say, to assembly. So what do you think, what would be the strategy to take in order to address the self-censorship? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So it's about self-censorship. Maybe we take a second question and then we can answer them.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It was really interesting. So I'm a second-year MI student as well, and a lot of what you guys discussed is directly relating to the thesis that I'm currently writing. So I wanted to ask your thoughts on how the alt-right pipeline, so for those who are not aware, it's essentially referring to the internet radicalization towards the right. So in your experience, how is the alt-right pipeline manifested in Austria specifically through social media and algorithmic functionality? And sort of in your work and in your daily life, how are you seeing it impacting people, but specifically minorities in this country? And what are some ways you would suggest there could be structural changes made? Thank you.
Okay, who feels like picking up on one of either of the questions?
I mean, I
Yeah,
can
sure.
maybe start with the second one. Monitoring the Austrian media landscape is not that easy due to algorithms. So honestly, I need to say that I'm not in the digital bubble of the far right. But taking, for example, the example of Germany, the elections there, especially when I think back, I think it was the EU Parliament elections last year, one could really see that on social media platforms, especially TikTok, AfD was leading very much. I think Alexander Grah or Mr. Grah was the candidate, and he produced a lot of social media content, very catchy. And what was interesting is that he per se was not talking about political content, but he was using anti-feminist rhetoric to engage young people and to gain voters. So he was not talking about what he wants to do in the EU Parliament, but he was talking about, if you are a real man, you are voting for the far right. You don't need that whatever to be strong and to show where the world is going. You need to vote for that. And I feel like that is something you can see how the far right is trying to mobilize, and they're very successful on social media, because I feel like other parties are maybe also not catching up with it through not political narratives, but using the anti-feminist or different narratives which are very emotional, because these extreme views are pushed way more by the algorithm than other views. So they try to exploit that, and sadly they're really, or in my opinion, they're really successful with it. Yeah.
Yes, and also the way that people are led to these views, like through, let's say, you watch someone cooking or preparing their garden or preparing food, and then 2 clicks away from the threadwives, you get to like the politicians in their worldviews. Anyone wants to pick on the second question, maybe?
Or the first?
The first one, exactly.
Self-censorship. I mean, I cannot say much on my own experience on that. Perhaps you have some.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult question because it's very nuanced and it encompasses a lot of different areas, so to speak. I think in the past, people were using memes very often to also post anonymously and to not have to show their face when they were taking a political stance. But in general, self-censorship is definitely happening. I mean, we see political persecution of activists happening regularly, also in the among climate activists, for example. So, what was your question exactly? Was it what to do against it? Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that can really support people in speaking out is community and organizing and not doing it individually. Because then it's also way more difficult to pinpoint you as the person who was behind a certain statement or behind a certain strategy, behind a certain thing. But I don't think there's a bulletproof strategy I could offer. I mean, we see that people are finding ways around it, and I think, I mean, the memes I showed, for example, they are from 2022, and I feel like they are really dated in a way. So millennials make this type of memes, but younger people often post content with their face, especially on TikTok, and it's truly happening. I don't have a good answer to this.
Perhaps, I don't know if you were only referring to the digital space, but perhaps there is a difference between offline and online here. I mean, self-censorship always existed in history, but as you said, perhaps offline there are other rules of how to communicate with each other that allow better to not do that. I don't know. Yeah? It's just a question. I'm not sure. So perhaps to connect better this digital and or offline and online worlds, let's say, allow better not to self-censor oneself, censorship oneself.
Yes, and obviously it's also a question of the political system and society you live in. Is it Austria, is it elsewhere in the world where there's real censorship and also people get imprisoned because they speak out? So I think it really makes a difference where you live, whether it's self-censorship or whether it's, you know, really a threat that for your lives, basically. Are there any other questions from the audience?
So thanks. I'm not a student here. I'm an outsider, just here for a visit. And it's maybe half a question, half a comment. Thinking about youth as a demographic category, which is excluded in all sorts of ways from the systems you're talking about. But to think about the uniqueness of youth as a demographic category in terms of its relative to exclusions, insofar as everyone at some point, as long as they're alive, is youthful at some point. And it's the one demographic category which, as long as you live, everybody stops being a member of, and how that uniqueness of it actually makes it a different kind of demographic category to think about in terms of creating spaces for inclusion, or that can be claimed because your status as, I mean, other categories have potential for some shifting, but not where it's guaranteed that everyone will stop being young, you know, or that everyone was once young. And what ramifications does that have for thinking about the issues here relative to other categories, whether that's queerness or religion or race or ethnicity or nationality or what have you? So.
Yes, and also with the longevity movement at the moment, I think there's various privileges also attached to being young in a society. Is there any other questions from the students?
So first of all, thank you. My name is Wallace, a second-year student from the Diplomatic Academy. So I would like to focus on, because especially the questions to Ms. Anahita Neghabat, because you mentioned about the means in the internet. So that's why I would like, my questions would be focusing around means. How do you see your role in the society, and do you consider yourself as a key opinion leader, or simply saying KOL, which can influence the political culture in a country, or specifically saying is in Austria, by making those means? And also, like, do you think nowadays the young is trying to engage in the politics in another way, not like in a traditional way, participate in politics by voting or getting involvement in the parliament, for example, but trying to say that the young is also trying to engage in politics another way by creating those means in order to have a voice in the politics one. So that's why my question is, do you think the youth is also engaging the politics by making means? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So maybe a quick answer to that, if that's possible, and then we have 2 more questions from the students. 3 more, okay.
So regarding the first part of your question, Austria is a very small country, and it's therefore, I think, possible to intervene in public discourse quite quickly in a way that's tangible. At the time, this meme page had, I don't know, 27,000 followers, and a lot of them were people who work in media, activists from NGOs. The vice chancellor or his social media team was following me at one point. And some of the memes and the aesthetic of the memes was then copied by, for example, mainstream media outlets like Der Standard started posting really similar memes after my meme page became this big. So there was a really tangible effect. And sometimes framings to certain policies, for example, that were being introduced were also being picked up by people who were journalists. So I could definitely see that. But I think that's also directly related to the fact that Austria is just a very small country. Yeah. And the second part of your question, and I don't know what the impact then was of that, but this is what I could actually see. And regarding the second part of your question, can someone remind me?
No, maybe you just
if
can
people
explain
use
whether
memes.
your this page was connected to your real name or whether it was an
No, it was
anonymous
not.
page. So it wasn't identified with you as a person. So
Yeah,
any
otherwise it would not
backlash,
have been
any
as successful.
hate didn't get through to you personally.
Yes. So people also assumed that I was a team of men. So I was regularly addressed as Sers Burschen, or like they assumed that it was a team of men who would also speak dialect. And I'm 100% certain that also the feminist content, the anti-racist content that I posted, if it would have been attached to my face as a young woman with a migration background, it would not have been as successful by far.
So one more strategy to work around self-censorship, just work anonymously. That could be one strategy. So we hear 3 more questions, please.
We have one other which we didn't answer yet.
All right.
Are we answering afterwards?
Maybe let's hear the 3
Okay,
and then we
sorry.
can round up because the time is running.
Thank you. My name is Catalina. I'm a second-year student here, and my question is about memes. So besides memes, do you see other tools in the digital space that young people can use to intervene in political discourse? And also perhaps besides these tools, what are the main obstacles also in the digital space that impede this political participation?
So maybe we hear at least one more
Hi,
question.
I'm Carlo from MAIS program. Thank you very much for presentations. My question is how do youth-led digital subcultures kind of redefine or challenge the traditional understandings of self-expression and freedom of expression? Thank you.
And there's one more student question, please.
Perfect, the final one. Alexander Weiskopf, also from MAIS 2. So my question would be about how can we ensure that freedom of expression is in youth cultures is not limited to social media engagement, but also includes those who express themselves offline or also lack access to digital platforms. Thank you.
So Cäcilia, maybe you can pick on one of the questions.
Maybe I will start with the one we didn't answer before, because I really like that you brought it up, because often when I work as a youth representative and I'm in spaces where youth is underrepresented, people often think that they can relate, or that they also have a say in youth topics just because people were young once. And I agree to some extent, but what most people often forget and what is important to highlight is that all different generations of young people were brought up in a whole different environment, in different worlds. Just when I'm talking with my parents were brought up in a whole nother time with different ways of communication, how to engage in society itself. So sometimes it's difficult because it feels like you're not getting taken serious because people think, I can relate, I was once young as well and whatever, but actually all the different experiences from different generations are very important to bring to the table. So yes, it's very much important because it is an aspect which is often used to not silence youth, but not take them as serious because people think, I know that already. Yeah.
So any other views on the questions that we just heard?
The last one, immediately I thought, okay, I should say something which I had not a chance to, but say it now. We also have the the UNESCO freedom of the Convention Cultural Expressions. Yeah. Thank you. We just celebrated it last week, 2 weeks ago. I think this is really a good way, as it is done in social media, but it can be offline as well. So we have to be aware that political expression is not everything. Let's say you can voice your opinions and so on in different ways. It's not only in a political field or in a political voice, but it can be different ways, in kind of expressions, cultural expressions. And so cultural participation as the best way to come to societal participation in my eyes. That's what also many of these projects are trying to do, and that we are accompanying or doing ourselves. So finding ways, artistic ways, creative ways to engage, as it is happening in social media, as it is it happens in different ways of cultural expressions, art projects, and so on.
Yes. And depending on the society you live in, a dance can be a political act and an artistic act at the same time. So, any other comments on the questions from the students?
I think one question was, do people use other online or digital media apart from memes, right? Yes, so I think they use there are online social media platforms that look like regular news outlets. People do interviews, they write articles, podcasts, etc., etc. They film panels and put them on YouTube. Still, I think because of the reasons I mentioned earlier, memes sometimes function a bit differently, with being often anonymous, being created collectively, being very fast, working through satire. So I think it's worth sometimes considering memes as a separate medium where you need very little resources to put something out there. Yeah. A very great resource is the Critical Meme Reader by the Institute of Network Cultures. There are 3 editions, I think, at this point, and I contributed to the first and the second. And they have really, really great research on the impact of memes, also political impact, also transnationally and beyond Europe.
So maybe we have room for one more very quick question from the audience. I think there's one in the front.
If there are no students raising their hands. Hello everyone, I'm Tatjana Nikolic from Institute for Cultural Management, MDV. I was interested if anyone is aware or following actively what is happening in Serbia at the moment. Speaking of the reason of students, I have to apologize because I was late, so maybe something was mentioning at the beginning. Okay, so the students...
Wasn't mentioned.
Yeah, then it's clear that I can proceed. I'm not wasting too much time. So students of arts, students of drama have initiated a total student protest all over the country for the past 7 years, and digital communications have increased tremendously to this fight, and probably especially because students of arts, of drama arts, of cinematography, of film, of visual graphics, gaming, and so on have actually been among the core team. So actually it spreaded really significantly in the past 7 months. It led to Prime Minister leaving position, Mayor of City of Novi Sad leaving the position, and many, many other political turbulences. So I was wondering if anyone has a reflection or any kind of comment between this freedom of expression, political impact, and actually art students producing this struggle. There were more than 400 different cities and villages and towns protesting in the past 7 months, which is huge. And actually, on the 15th of March, the biggest ever protest in Serbian history happened due to exactly students of not only Faculty of Drama Arts now, but all students in the country. Exactly mobilizing community and their peers, first of all, through Instagram, more than anything else. Editing very cool, very quick videos, following all the trends of Instagram and so on. So it really did made a huge impact in the societal vibes at the moment, which is a very nice combination of political engagement and youth culture, I would say.
Thank you, Tatjana, for pointing at this ongoing struggle in Serbia and the role of young artists and activists in this. Any reactions from the panelists?
I mean, I can connect to the convention you were mentioning, because it's already, as you said, 20 years old, but it's still so relevant. So exactly for these causes, it is the protection that is needed for artists, for filmmaking, for music, for series, to not only be protected and have the freedom to make it, but also be represented. So it's a question of what is valid and what is not valid. And we as a society need to discuss who has this validation, because as we said, as long as it shouldn't be harmful, it shouldn't threaten anyone or whatever. But I feel like that is the big issue here, that it's a question of representation, and how can you give them representation? Who are the actors who are deciding which art is getting a lot of representation and which is not, depending on which medium obviously you use for film or music or whatever. So that is why we need this kind of conventions and uphold them and talk about it to make it a topic. Yeah.
So thank you very much to all of the panelists and to the audience and students and to the technical staff behind the scene, also supporting this event, to Nicole Leinig for the technical support. Thank you very much. This event leaves me with a lot of questions, and I think it's a good starting point for this evening. And also, I think talking to young people is a lot about shutting up and listening. So eventually this is what I'm going to do. Thank you very much. Have a very good evening and a safe way home. Bye.